Tuesday. I'm Steve Dempsey with the Bay Area News Group. Joining us today for the discussion is Washington Post Writers Group columnist Ruben Navarrette. Hi, Ruben. Thanks for joining us. Okay. And also joining us is Bay Area News Group political writer Matt Artz. Thanks for joining us, Matt.
Happy to be in Walnut Creek.
We're happy to have you here too. So it was expected that Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton were going to have big nights, and they did. Trump came away winning 7 states as well as Clinton did, both leading their respective parties, although Bernie Sanders is kind of hanging in there a little bit. But Trump was the more impressive winner last night, Matt, and he just kind of keeps rolling along.
He is definitely in the driver's seat right now, but he didn't do it quite as well as I think people might have thought he would have done a week or 10 days ago. And he won some of those states by a relatively small margin. Virginia by a few percentage points, Arkansas only by a few percentage points, Vermont as well. Just a few weeks after he won New Hampshire decisively. So I think right now, 2 weeks, May 15, looks like a very decisive moment in this campaign because you'll have Florida and you'll have Ohio up for grabs, and both of those are winner-take-all states when it comes to delegates. So if Trump can beat John Kasich in Ohio and he can beat Rubio in Florida, he would really, have a very strong claim to the nomination and he'd be very hard to catch. If he doesn't do so well in those states, it is possible that you could kind of have this long game of trying to keep Trump from getting I think it's 1,237 delegates he'd need to get the nomination. So I think this is really heading to a very critical moment on March 15th.
Ruben, do you agree that it could have been more impressive for Trump last night?
Yes, I think, and I agree with Matt, if the margins of victory had been greater in some places, nobody can take away from him the fact that he won 7 states. 7 out of 11 is a great showing. But I think another way of putting it is that Ted Cruz did better than expected, winning 3 states, not just his home state of Texas, but also Oklahoma and Alaska, and that Marco Rubio proved that you can win in Minnesota, which is a place not where Rubio has particularly been well known or spent much time. So those were good nights for those 2 gentlemen, and I think that the angst that people are feeling comes from the fact that the establishment is becoming much more vocal in the last 48 hours about the fact that they are getting very nervous about the prospect of Trump being their nominee. We now hear
Okay, unfortunately, it looks like his picture froze up there a little bit.
Duke and PK just a few days ago has slowed things down for Trump. So it's a culmination of lots of things.
So, at this point, what is attracting voters to Trump? I mean, how is he able to kind of keep this going?
There's so many things. He's a master marketer, but he's tapped into a lot of anger and disgust with the political parties and with politicians in general. He doesn't take money. He can't be influenced by outside forces. He's not politically correct. He says what's on his mind. Whenever people ask that question, what's working for Trump, you have to think about what's behind door number 2 and conventional politicians who have left people with a sour taste in their mouth in both parties. So I think that Trump he's sort of like the Uncola, 7-Up's marketing campaign from the 70s. The Uncola, he's the unpolitician, and it's worked very well for him. I will say one more thing. He does have, I've come to know in the last 9 months of watching him, a gift for people. He knows people. You can be like Bill Clinton and really enjoy people, or you can be like Donald Trump and he really studies people and knows people. And he's always playing chess. He always knows that if he does this, if he does X, people will respond by doing Y. And if he does Y, they'll respond by doing Z. And that is very helpful in politics. To be able to know audiences that well and know the voters that well is a really valuable asset.
Yeah, Matt, I think the establishment pretty much underestimated Trump from the beginning, and now this tidal wave is taking place in a way, don't you think?
I think there's a huge urgency right now among Republicans to try to, stop this from really becoming a tidal wave. At this point, he's still maybe, I think he has about 262 delegates, so he's still nearly 1,000 delegates away from where he has to be. And Meg Whitman and a couple other wealthy Republicans are now funding a super PAC to try to, stop his momentum in some areas. So I don't, I think we're going to find out very soon whether this is a tidal wave or whether, there might be some fatigue with Trump and his style that really, starts to manifest itself, in the next few weeks. So we'll find out soon.
I'm not sure if you guys saw his speech last night. I don't know if you did or not. Okay. There was talk that he seemed a little more presidential with it last night. He wasn't really bombasting anybody. What was your guys' take on that?
I think he tried to present himself as a unifier. I don't know if that's a very convincing argument. He also, he did launch a few attacks on Marco Rubio, of a reality show variety. So I don't think he was completely presidential. And, again, if he can do well in the next couple of weeks, he does have a chance to maybe pivot and focus more on, general election voters. But if he doesn't, if this becomes a longer race, then he is a bit of a quandary because that kind of bombastic style, it serves him well in the primaries with a lot of, angry Republican voters, casting many of the ballots. We go straight till June, and he's contesting every primary trying to get to that delegate count, and he has to continue that bombastic style. Then he doesn't have much time to pivot for the general election, and that could, he probably doesn't have much of a chance in November anyway, but I think that would even, make him a longer shot if he has to continue this style for months to come.
Ruben, what did you think about his speech? Oh, we lost him. Okay. So I agree with you. It's going to be tough over the long haul. Oh, is he? Ruben, are you still there?
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. So what do you think about Trump's speech last night?
I think you're right that he's learned a lot. He's been learning. He's got a great ability to learn over time. He's become a much better politician than he was 9 months ago. And I think that as it is with any human being, when you start winning states, this mission becomes real to you. And I think that it's started to sink into Donald Trump that he is going to win the GOP nomination, and he might well be elected president. And when I think that becomes a real thing, he's going to become much more sober in his presentation material. I'm not sure that that's the wisest move because it seems that the old Trump has gotten him this far. But I think he's trying to be much more presidential because it's beginning to sink in that he's doing very well. And listen, I mean, by any objective standard, he is doing really well. 7 states last night. He's won, 9 so far overall. He's never run for office before. He spent very little money. He is doing incredibly well, despite how much distaste I and others have for some of the things he's saying. It seems that he's really struck a chord, and people are embracing him. So.
Well, I would think that he's got to be turning off Latino voters, don't you think?
Oh, very much so. And I think that there was a new poll out that said that he's about 80% of Hispanics have a very negative view of him. There are other groups of voters who have a negative view of him. But at the same time, he is doing well with the other 20% of Hispanics who served him well in Nevada and will serve him well in the Southwest and certain pockets of the Southwest. He'll find Hispanic support. I'm sure he found some in Texas. I think it's significant that he understands politics so well that now a very loud narrative has emerged that this has all been an act, that his anti-immigration hardline has been very much a concoction to get these votes from people, and he doesn't really believe it. And that's where you have the story from the New York Times, the audio tape that the New York Times has in its possession. The editorial board has an interview with Trump that they're sitting on, where Trump essentially says that these views are manufactured. and that he doesn't really intend to deport 11 million people or build a wall. So, he's a master marketer. We're struck now at this moment with how much of this is real and how much of this is packaging.
That's interesting. So I guess last night, though, Ted Cruz kind of entered the picture a little bit, Matt. Winning 3 states. He has 4 overall now. Is it possible that he can become a player here? A big player?
You could look at it 2 ways for Ted Cruz. I mean, he had to win Texas to stay in the race, and he did. And he did a little bit better than that by getting Alaska and Oklahoma. But a lot of these states were really tailor-made for him to win. And when I think he got into the race initially, you thought he'd do quite well in the South, and instead he lost a lot of evangelical votes to Trump. So in some sense, he was able to stay in the race and exceed expectations, but those expectations were probably lower than what he had set for himself months ago. I think one of the kind of interesting dynamics of the Republican race is when somebody goes very negative on one candidate, somebody else benefits. So when you had Chris Christie attacking Rubio in New Hampshire, Donald Trump and John Kasich benefited. And then you had Rubio attacking Trump the past week, and it looks like Cruz benefited a little bit from that. But I think if you look at the results, what it does for Cruz is it keeps him in the race, but it doesn't really give him a real path to victory. And if anything, it looks as if instead of the Republicans trying to winnow the field to a one-on-one race with Trump, either Cruz versus Trump or Rubio versus Trump, you're looking more at a scenario where perhaps all these people stay in the race and they're trying to just take as many delegates as they can to keep Trump from passing that threshold to get the nomination and trying to work toward a brokered convention.
But does Cruz have a point, though, that the GOP should rally around him to defeat Trump? Is he the guy they should rally around?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I've known Ted Cruz for a long time, but more than 12 years, how does Ted make the argument now that somehow he's the person the GOP should support when he himself has never been supportive of the GOP? He's gotten this far in building a very strong political brand as an outsider, going to war with his party leaders, members of his leadership in the Senate, like Mitch McConnell and others. And now to say somehow that the GOP should rally around him, he has to understand that he is an outlier in the political system, and that it's very hard for people like Rubio and Kasich and others to come to Cruz, where he has put himself outside the main on so many of these issues.
It's really ironic that we have the 2 frontrunners, Trump and Cruz, and the establishment is taking a beating here. Talk about that.
Well, I think at this point there's really one front runner, and it's Donald Trump. And the question is, does he get enough delegates to win the nomination, or does it become some sort of contested convention in July? I don't think at this point Cruz or Rubio could be considered front runners. At this point, they're really spoilers. In fact, everybody else in the field is a potential spoiler for Trump. Trump is really the only candidate in the Republican field right now who conceivably has a path to winning the nomination. Obviously, this has been a very bad primary season for the Republican establishment, and there's still a lot of questions as to what really becomes of the party if Trump is in fact the nominee. And again, I think March 15th is really going to be, it's a pivotal moment, because if Trump does win Ohio and Florida and is clearly on his path to the nomination, then Republicans really have to decide, do they get behind him, or do they even consider some sort of a third party run, which could really persuade a huge GOP breakup or a huge division that would take generations to really heal.
Wow. Sure. Ruben, are you with us here?
Yes.
Okay. So what do you think about that? The establishment on the Republican side really taking a beating here?
Oh, absolutely, and it's been going for a while. But I think Matt's point about March 15th is really important, because isn't it March 15th where Florida weighs in? We're talking about Florida before. That's going to be an incredibly important state. I mean, Florida which captured our imagination in 2000. Here it comes again because we're seeing that Donald Trump actually leads Marco Rubio in Florida. A lot of former New Yorkers retired and live in Florida. Clearly, if Marco Rubio loses Florida, it's over for him, and it's become a big, big prize. To Matt's point, the establishment's been wrong about Trump all along, and now they're just worried that if he's the nominee, he gives so much ammunition to Hillary Clinton. He's like a constant gaffe machine that will always feed off, feed off and make mistakes and hand them to Hillary. So it's a real concern. I'm not sure if Republicans are more afraid of Donald Trump losing or if Donald Trump winning, but either scenario is very frightening for them.
No, the Republican Party is in a really difficult bind right now. And even if you have a brokered convention, it could go, you could argue one of two ways. It could be a huge fiasco that makes them look terrible, and that leaves Trump supporters furious and angry and unwilling to support whichever nominee comes forward. Or potentially, you could argue that it would give the Republicans, a nominee who wasn't tarnished by the last 6 months of this very angry, aggressive campaign, and could perhaps give them some sort of a fresh start, heading into the November election.
So, any chance, let's say Rubio does win Florida, any chance that Rubio can just produce this rally to jump back into the mix here, or basically he's just biding his time here?
I mean, clearly Rubio needs Florida to have any chance of, winning the nomination. I think he would still need help. I think he needs some sort of implosion by Donald Trump. That's really the key for Rubio, because at this point, Cruz has no reason to get out, and even if Cruz did get out, and even if Kasich got out too, it's not even clear that Rubio could beat Trump, one-on-one at this point. So I think what he needs is for Trump to be weakened, either a self-inflicted wound, and he said plenty of things that in a normal year with a normal person would have essentially disqualified him from even being considered the president. Or perhaps a wound that comes from somewhere else, either these super PACs or his tax returns or whatever the New York Times has off the record if that comes out. He needs something to really damage Trump, I think, to have a legitimate shot at this point of getting the nomination.
Yeah, Ruben, what do you think, Marco Rubio, even if he wins Florida, is there any chance he can produce a big rally here?
I don't think the numbers are there. I don't think the numbers are there for Rubio at this point. I mean, if he goes on till June and takes California, of the three of them, it may be that he's got a good shot at California. That's a lot of votes. But it's a long way between here and there.
Let's go on to the Democratic side now. The night went pretty good for Hillary, and she picked up some pretty big states there, Matt.
It did go well, and what she showed is that she has a commanding lead among African Americans. And if you win majorities of women, older voters, and African Americans, it's really hard to lose the Democratic nomination. And she's at a point now where I think Sanders has the ability to contest many states. He's raised enough money, and he has a message that I think he wants to bring to probably all 50 states if he can. But it just doesn't seem as if he has much of a chance to actually win the nomination, and it seems as if he's becoming more of a message candidate and less of a very serious threat to Hillary Clinton.
Ruben, what did you think about Hillary's performance last night? She got some big states.
She did, and she is strong with African Americans. That's no small thing in the Democratic Party. They are incredibly loyal to the Clintons. But Bernie Sanders continues to do well in one regard that people just can't take this away from him. What I'm about to say, phenomenal fundraising. We talked about conventional wisdom. The conventional wisdom says that when two candidates are running, and candidate A is so decisively racking up the number of states, it should be harder for candidate B to raise money. People stop giving money to candidates who are losing states. Period. That hasn't happened here. In January, Bernie Sanders raised over $20 million, $27 at a time. In February, it was $41 million. In March, it could be $60 million. The more states Hillary Clinton wins, the more money Bernie Sanders raises. What that tells me is that there is a great palpable level of discontent among some Democrats who are with Bernie Sanders. They will not go gently into that good night. They do not want to surrender to the idea that Hillary Clinton is their nominee. What does that mean? That means that inevitably, as Hillary Clinton becomes the nominee, good luck getting them to vote in November. It's going to be very much a turnout game. I have spoken to a number of people who are Bernie supporters who say that all is not forgiven, and if Hillary's the nominee, even if she's facing off against someone like Donald Trump, they will not feel compelled to go out and vote for her.
I saw that at a Democratic state convention here in San Jose over the weekend, and it won't matter too much in California because Hillary Clinton will win California, whether the Bernie supporters really come out in large numbers for her or not. But it definitely, I think, is cause for her to fear in other states, and the risk, even if there isn't a Nader type person on the ballot, the idea if too many people on the far left stay at home, or if you don't get behind her, she could lose some of those states that Democrats have won by just a little bit in the last few elections.
Yeah, and those 5 states that are critical, those 5, it's funny, we have 50 states, but only 5 elect a president because Texas cancels out California, et cetera, et cetera. The 5 states that matter on election night, the battleground states, are the purple states that can go either way. They're Nevada, Colorado, Florida, Ohio, and Virginia. And in those 5 critical states, Bernie Sanders won Colorado. If, in fact, the Hillary turnout is not as great because Bernie supporters didn't simply fall in line, that's going to be a problem for the Democrats. But
what I'm seeing is the Democratic convention could get a little dicey there, do you think?
It's too early, I think, to tell. I mean, I'm sure Sanders, assuming that Hillary wins the nomination and Sanders finishes a respectable second, he's going to have his night at the convention. We don't know who her vice presidential pick will be. It could be someone who excites Sanders supporters. She will have the majority of the delegates there. She's the nominee. They will support her. So, it's not looking like it's going to be a contested convention. And if she's the nominee, she'll set the rules for the convention, and Sanders, I'm sure, will have his night.
The thing about Sanders is he says he wants to go to the convention, and you know how we talked before about Ted Cruz? Ted Cruz wants Marco Rubio to get out of the race. Well, too bad. It's not up to Ted Cruz. And likewise, Hillary Clinton would like for Bernie Sanders to leave the race now, today, but it's not up to her either. And if he goes to all 50 states, as he says, and he goes to the convention, this draws it out a lot longer than Hillary would have liked. She's got to really handle him well. To Matt's point, let him have his night. Let him have his speech. Do not, under any circumstances, Mrs. Clinton, appear to be pushing Bernie Sanders out of the way, off the stage, before he has his moment.
You really don't see a toe-to-toe fight between Hillary and Bernie going down the stretch here. You see Hillary kind of pulling away here.
I think Bernie Sanders, as Ruben was saying, has the resources and the will to contest every state, and I think he will. But it doesn't mean that once we get to June in the California primary, doesn't mean that he'll have a realistic chance of winning the nomination. So you could have a contested primary, but you would probably have a very clear-cut scenario of Hillary Clinton ultimately